some connectivity issues from my end.
Okay, recording, it's going on. All right. Okay. So now, see, what happened was, eventually all the 4 states of the Maratha states were also forcefully, their territories were added in the British territories. Okay, so Maratha power was eventually crushed, and the company acquired complete control over the Vindhyan territories. Are there any more doubts on this particular part here? So far we have covered the subsidiary alliance, and here you can see the gradual change in the way the alliance was being forced on the Indian kings and the rulers. Eventually, the first Nawab whose territory was annexed using the subsidiary alliance was the Nizam of Hyderabad. It was a proper friendly agreement between the East India Company initially, but later on the other, in the case of Mysore also, there was a war waged against Tipu Sultan and Hyder Ali, and eventually half of the Mysore territory was given away to the Nizam of Hyderabad and half was taken by the British. So these kind of things were happening during those times when initially they started with the subsidiary alliance, and also they waged a few wars. They were following various methods of political domination or diplomatic ways to control and acquire the Indian territories. Now we'll quickly come to the next policy, the doctrine of paramountcy. As I was explaining you in the previous class, according to Lord Francis Rawdon Hastings, the new policy of paramountcy was that in this policy, the company claimed that its authority was supreme, and hence its power was greater than of the Indian states and rulers. So now company became aggressive. They started waging wars and they started territorial expansion using the Indian soldiers. Let me tell you, they did not have their own soldiers. Their armies were made of the Indian citizens only, of the different kingdoms that they acquired. And for them also, they were taking payments from the Indian rulers. Okay, so now here I gave you the example of Rani Chennamma of the small state of Kittur in present-day Karnataka. She rebelled and eventually she died in 1829. Also, another incident is of another, sort of a chowkidar. He is known as the district of Sangoli in Kittur. He also carried out a resistance, and with popular support, he destroyed many British camps and records. He was caught and hanged by the British in the year 1830. So these were some of the rebellions that happened against the doctrine of paramountcy. So what was the doctrine of paramountcy? It is again different from the subsidiary alliance. Here the British East India Company started waging wars against the Indian rulers. Now, when we're talking about the doctrine of paramountcy, another 2 major kingdoms were annexed by the British, especially in the northwestern area, northwestern provinces. So initially Anglo-Afghan wars were held in the northwest areas. During those times, the British East India Company had fears from Russia. They were fearing that because at that time Russia was becoming very, very strong, so they may acquire the Indian territory also. So they feared the Russian government at that time. So what they did, they tried to control the northwestern Indian territories. And how did they do? Again, they waged wars against the Afghan rulers during those times. So prolonged wars with Afghanistan between 1838 to 1842 happened, and that led to the establishment of indirect rule of the East India Company. Similarly, Anglo-Sikh wars, again, this was an example of under the doctrine of paramountcy. Again, the Sindh was taken over in 1943, and there were 2 wars. After the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in 1939, he was the most prominent and powerful ruler of Punjab. After his death, Punjab was also annexed after 2 Anglo-Sikh wars by 1849. Akanksha, can you please mute your mic? Who's that? Okay, now I'm muting everyone. Dear children, now we will do an activity on figure 11 on Maharaja Ranjit Singh holding a court. Let me show you the picture. I'm just sharing a screen with you. Just stop. Can you see this screen here, children? So here, this is figure 11.
Yes, ma'am.
Maharaja Ranjit Singh is holding a court. And let me tell you, he was so powerful that during his reign, the company could not take over Punjab, because Punjab was a huge province at that time. So they could not control Punjab till the time of his death in 1839, and after that 2 prolonged wars were fought with the Sikh kingdom, and ultimately in 1849 Punjab was annexed. So here this is a picture of Maharaja Ranjit Singh is holding a court. Children, all these images are important. That is why I'm showing you. From your exam point of view, you may get picture description questions, objective questions you may get. So all images in your lessons are important. So that's why I've showed you this. Okay, now we'll come to the next policy, that is of the doctrine of lapse. Let me share the screen with you. So this covers the doctrine of paramountcy. So in doctrine of paramountcy, which main kingdoms were annexed? The Afghan kingdoms, Sindh territory, and the Punjab kingdom. Okay, that was the doctrine of paramountcy. Now we come to the doctrine of lapse. Now the final wave of annexations occurred under Lord Dalhousie. This was a doctrine which was introduced by Lord Dalhousie between the years 1848 to 1856. He was the Governor General of India during those times, and he devised this policy of doctrine of lapse. And under this policy, he declared that if an Indian ruler died without a male heir, his kingdom would lapse. That is, will become a part of company's territory. You already know about Rani Lakshmi Bai, how after her husband's death, yeah, her kingdom Jhansi was annexed by the doctrine of lapse. Yes, Smriti, you have a question here. If you have a question, you can ask me now. Yeah, so I hope you understood the doctrine of lapse means that if you don't have a male here, if no son in the kingdom is there and he cannot be made the king, then the entire territory of that kingdom will be annexed by the British, by the company. So this was what the doctrine of lapse was, against which Rani Lakshmi Bai and many other rulers fought against the British East India Company in the revolt of 1857. That was the main reason why the revolt happened, one of the important reasons. And I have given you some other states here which were annexed by the doctrine of lapse here. Satara in 1848, Sambalpur in 1858, in 1850, Udaipur in 1852, Nagpur in 1853, Jhansi in 1854, and finally the Awadh was the last territory to be annexed by the doctrine of lapse. You already know in the revolt of 1857, the queen of Awadh also participated in the revolt of 1857. Yeah, so most of these rulers like Nana Sahib, Tatya Tope, Rani Lakshmi Bai, all these participated in the revolt of 1857 along with the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar. Okay, so now what here happened was eventually when they were annexing Awadh under the doctrine of lapse, the East India Company claimed that they were obliged by the duty to take over Awadh in order to free the people from the misgovernment of the Nawab of Awadh. So now this enraged the people of Awadh, and they felt humiliated when the East India Company claimed that. And the people of Awadh joined the revolt of 1857, which is also known as the first war of independence for India. I hope this is clear to all of you. Any doubts here,
Yes,
children?
ma'am.
So far we have covered all the main policies. We started the second section on company rule expands. What were the political, economic, and diplomatic policies they followed to extend or expand their rule in India? So first of them was the subsidiary alliance. Second was the doctrine of paramountcy, and the third important is the doctrine of lapse. But let me tell you, in subsidiary alliance and eventually, initially, there was no wars were not being waged. But by the when the doctrine of paramountcy and doctrine of lapse they started utilizing for annexing the territories, they started waging war in different territories in India, and eventually the entire subcontinent came under the direct control of the British East India Company, leading to the first war of independence in India in the year 1857 under the leadership of the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar. Okay. Now, children, I'll come to the last part of this lesson, that is setting up new administration. Also, I would like to make it clear here, children, I have given you one map activity here. And I have specifically mentioned two main policies, the subsidiary alliance and the doctrine of lapse. So you have to observe these maps. Let me share the screen with you. Children, you have a map here on these particular maps I have shared yesterday. Yes? Everyone with me
Ma'am,
here?
it is on history page. Ma'am, it is in our history book, page
Yes,
number
it is.
20.
Yeah. It is. This page is from your history book. So figure 11, it says figure ABC, expansion of British territorial power in India. Look at these maps along with the present day political map of India. In each of maps, try and identify the different parts of India that were not under British control. So you can see that in figure 11A, you can see the red is not under the British control and yellow is under British control. And eventually how the territories they were acquiring. You can see areas under British rule were increasing, and eventually before the revolt of 1857, you can see this was the situation. Okay, and when the first war of independence was lost, even the Punjab territories by 1849, even Punjab was taken control of. Sindh and Baluchistan was also taken by the British. So eventually, after the first war of independence was lost, the entire Indian subcontinent came under the direct control of the Queen of England. So, beta, jo aapka map work hai, in your map work, you specifically have to observe these maps, and you may have to locate or mark territories which were annexed by the British East India Company, number one, either by the subsidiary alliance or secondly by the doctrine of lapse. ठीक है, ये map work हमने इस lesson के लिए सिर्फ इतना ही दिया है. If you have any queries based on the map work on the territories annexed, I will give you specific, name of the territories. I will mail you. I will message you the territories under subsidiary alliance, specific territories, which can be seen here in these three maps also, and also doctrine of lapse. I hope no questions on the map here. Anybody? All right. Now I'll come to the next last section of this particular lesson, which is set new administration. Children, when you are now the British and East India Company was controlling the entire country, and they set up new rules to administer and to control the country, to rule the country. They set up new rules. Just like in your civics lesson, you have learned how a constitution is a set of rules to govern a country. So similarly, the British, when they acquired Indian territories, they started making new rules to govern our country. So the first Governor General who made, specifically he made new rules in the field of justice system. Okay, so Warren Hastings, his tenure was from the year 1773 to 1785. Before that, can you tell me who was the Governor General before Warren Hastings? Who was the governor? Who was there when Battle of Buxar was there?
Robert Clive.
Very good. It was Robert Clive. And after that, it was Warren Hastings from 1773. And you already know about the impeachment of Robert Clive. And after Robert Clive, even Warren Hastings' impeachment also happened in the British Parliament. I will come to that. Okay, so now from 1773 to 1785, Warren Hastings has been credited by the British East India Company to control the territories mainly of Bengal, Bombay, and Madras. And the British divided their territories into administrative provinces, and these provinces were known as presidencies. So initially, 3 presidencies were there under British control, which were Bengal, Bombay, and Madras. This may also come as a map question, children. Okay, you may have to mark the presidencies, the initial 3 presidencies of the British in the 18th century were Bengal, Bombay, and Madras. Okay, now each was ruled by a governor general. All the 3 administrative presidencies were ruled by a governor general. At that time, Warren Hastings was there, and thus Warren Hastings introduced many reforms specifically in the sphere of justice. In the year 1772, new system of justice was introduced. He introduced 2 types of courts. Earlier, of course, courts were there. The king was there. He used to provide justice. But now he started, just like in the British parliamentary system, they started in the justice. They made 2 courts. One was known as the Faujdari Adalat and the other was known as the Diwani Adalat. The Faujdari Adalat was the criminal court. In your civics book also this year, you have lessons on the criminal court and the civil court. What is the purpose and what is the role of a criminal court and a civil court? We will learn about in great depth and detail in your civics book also. But here you can see how this was introduced initially by Warren Hastings in the year 1772. Please remember, this is very important. Okay, the 2 courts were introduced: criminal court, that is Faujdari Adalat, and civil court, Diwani Adalat. Initially, because there was a language problem and the people were of a different culture, so the Maulvis means who belong to who were Islamists, and the Hindu Pandits, they interpreted the Indian laws for British district collectors in civil court. During those times, collector was the supreme power or authority or figure for the administration in these presidencies. Okay, and here we are mainly talking about the courts. So mainly the Maulvis and Hindu Pandits were making the interpretation of the new laws that the British were making. I hope till here everybody is clear. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Yes,
now similarly, but when we're talking, I have just mentioned that in the previous slide that Maulvis and Hindu Pandits were interpreting laws for the civil courts, which means for the Diwani Adalat. Okay, in case of Faujdari Adalat or criminal court, Qazi and Mufti were taking care of the criminal court, but they were under the supervision of the British collectors. Okay, over their law in the civil court, laws were being made by the British, but they were interpreted by the Maulvis and the Hindu Pandits. But on the other hand, the criminal courts directly did not come directly under the control of the British. They were just doing, the collectors was just doing the interpretation here, and they were the Qazis and Muftis were doing the job of justice in the criminal courts. So here one problem was there. The problem was that the Brahmin Pandits, they gave different interpretations of the Dharma Shastras when they were interpreting the laws, the British laws in the civil courts. Okay. Also, yes. Any doubt here? Okay. Now another new act, and by the year 1773, when you have the this new act was also passed. During those regulating act was also passed in 1773 under Warren Hastings. And what happened was Supreme Court was established. Children, you already know what is the difference between the Supreme Court, High Court, Sessions, District Court, yes, and the Sessions Court. You already know. So in 1773, Warren Hastings, under the when he was the governor, Supreme Court was established. Also, another court of appeal was established, which was known as the Sardar Nizamat Adalat in Kolkata. Any doubt here, children? This was as per the regulating
No,
act
ma'am.
of 1973. Okay, now during those times, collector was the supreme figure in the district, and the collectorate became the center of the power. So here, children, we have looked at initially the making of laws comes under legislature. So making of laws was not taken up entirely by the British during those times. So here also in administration also slowly they were acquiring the complete control over the administration of the Indian subcontinent. They making new laws and then implementing those new laws. So initially some problems were there. Now because of these problems, even Warren Hastings his impeachment happened in the British Parliament. Here in this activity picture, you can see it is on page number 21 here. His hearing is happening in the British Parliament. I'll share the screen with you, and here we'll finish off this today's lecture. I may have to carry on next week here, this and the last part of your lesson. So I'll just quickly share the screen of your lesson here.
Ma'am, what is meant by impeachment?
Impeachment means a kind of a hearing, a trial by the court. Okay, you are being accused of doing something wrong. Okay, and when you are accused, so the court sends summons to you, and you have to be present in the court for the hearing that if you have committed any crime or something wrong you have done. So here in this particular picture here, the trial of Warren Hastings painted by R.G. Pollard in 1789, he was tried. When Warren Hastings went back to England in 1785, Edmund Burke accused him of being personally responsible for the misgovernment of Bengal. This led to an impeachment proceeding in British Parliament that lasted 7 years. You can see the number of people in the court, in the Parliament here. Okay, now here is a description of I impeach the common enemy or an oppressor of all. Here is some information about what happened. Here is a passage from Edmund Burke, who accused Warren Hastings. Eloquent opening speech during the impeachment of Warren Hastings. What did he say about Warren Hastings? I impeach him in the name of the people of India, whose rights he has trodden under his foot and whose country he has turned into a desert. Lastly, in the name of human nature itself, in the name of both the sexes, in the name of every age, in the name of every rank, I impeach the common enemy and oppressor of all. Here, what is he accused of? Mismanagement. But why this mismanagement was happening? Because it was Warren Hastings who introduced a new system of justice. He introduced a new Faujdari Adalat and the Diwani Adalat. All right, so when he's making new laws, new system, so that led to oppression many times, led to many mismanagement. And when the Hindu Pandits and the Maulvis were interpreting the laws as per the Dharma Shastra, that led to many misleading information into the making of the laws. So this led to a lot of mismanagement. That is one of the reasons why he was tried by the British Parliament. Okay, we have just 5 minutes left. I guess we can continue with the company army. So now, children, when we're talking about the company's army, we have covered administration part, how gradually the British East India Company was acquiring control, administrative control over the Indian territory. We will now talk about the company's army. There were major changes were brought in the company's army after the revolt of 1857. Before that, the company was not aware that this kind of a rebellion will happen. Especially when the revolt was sparked off due to the disturbing the Hindu-Muslim sentiments in the you have already know about the sparking of the revolt of 1857 in Barakpur, Bengal by Mangal Pandey. So before that, company was not sure that the Indian people can rebel like this before the first war of independence. So here is a description of what the company's army was like before the revolt. Okay, the colonial rule in India brought in some new ideas of administration and reform, but its power rested on its military strength. The Mughal army was mainly composed of cavalry, sawars, trained soldiers on horseback, and infantry. That is, it's pedal foot soldiers. So they were given training in archery and the use of swords. So children, let me tell you, the army, the British East India Company army was mainly composed of Indian soldiers. Okay, the cavalry dominated the army, and the Mughal state did not feel the need to have a large professionally trained infantry. The rural areas had a large number of armed peasants, and and the local zamindars often supplied the Mughals with paidal soldiers. So children, you already know they were here. Also, the company was following the same system which the Mughals were following. So they had the zamindars in different areas. The zamindars used to maintain their own soldiers and their own armies, as it is mentioned here that the peasants were also soldiers. Okay, and the local zamindars often had their own armies, which during the time of wars they used to supply or provide to the emperor. A change occurred in the 18th century when Mughal successor states like Awadh and Banaras started recruiting peasants into their armies and training them as professional soldiers. So earlier this practice was not there, but eventually as all states were declaring themselves independent, they started maintaining their own army, recruiting peasants as soldiers in the army. The East India Company adopted the same method when it began recruitment for its own army, which came to be known as the Sepoy Army, from the Indian word Sipahi, meaning soldier. So as warfare technology changed from 1820, this cavalry requirement of the company's army declined. Cavalry included horsemen and the other soldiers. They were not using, initially they were not using any guns or daggers. So now with the change in technology means now there was a use of pistols and guns, daggers. So there was the new change was that because the British Empire was fighting in Burma, Afghanistan and Egypt, where soldiers were armed with muskets and matchlocks. The soldiers of the company army had to keep pace with the changing military requirements, and its infantry regiments now became more and more important. Okay? So that is why in the early 19th century, the British began to develop a uniform military culture. Children, you already know about the cartridge episode. So they had these pistols in which the cartridges had a layer, the covering of the fat the of cows and pigs, which led to the sparking of the revolt of 1857. They had to chew it off and then shoot using those
Excuse
guns.
me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, what is the meaning of infantry regiments?
Infantry here, it is mentioned here. Infantry here is mainly the not professionally trained soldiers. See, they were mainly using the cavalrymen, savar. It's mentioned men on horses. But earlier they were not using pistols and guns and daggers. Okay, so eventually with the changing technology, they had the coming of the guns, and here it is mentioned the musket, a heavy gun used by infantry soldiers. Here it is the meaning of the musket, and matchlock is also mentioned. A matchlock is an early type of gun in which the powder was ignited by match. Okay,
ma'am.
yeah, so earlier
Thank
these
you.
kind of new tools were not used in army. Only swords and different kinds of weapons were used, but guns were not there. It got developed by the middle of early 19th century. So because with the use of the
Okay,
muskets
thank
and
you.
matchlocks, this new change happened in the British army. Okay, so now in the
Okay, ma'am.
early 19th century, the British began to develop